3 weeks after my daughter, her husband, and my granddaughter moved into the house I built with my own 2 hands, I caught her teaching the girl to smile and say nothing when she got hurt. That night I asked her gently to stop. She turned on me in the kitchen and said, "You've been retired too long, Dad. Stay out of things you don't understand." Her husband stood behind her and said, "Apologize to Melissa or find somewhere else to sleep tonight." He said it in my own living room. He forgot whose name was on the deed. Names and details in this story have been changed, but the truth underneath it hasn't. Known. If you've ever been made to feel small in a house you built, you'll understand exactly why I did what I did. My name is Walter Meiers. I'm 71 years old, a retired carpenter, and I own a 2-story house on Larkspur Court in a wooded neighborhood outside Asheville, North Carolina. I've lived in it for 34 years. My wife Carol and I bought the lot when it was nothing but red clay and pines, and I framed the house myself over 2 summers with help from my brother and a case of beer every Saturday. Carol used to say the house smelled like sawdust and stubbornness for the first 10 years. She wasn't wrong. Carol died 6 years ago. Pancreatic cancer, the kind that doesn't give you much warning and doesn't leave much time once it does. People tell you, grief gets smaller with time. Thank you for watching. What I've found is that it doesn't get smaller. You just get better at building your life around the shape of it, the way you build a porch around an old tree instead of cutting it down. Some nights I still make 2 plates before I remember. The garden out back still has her tomato cages up, even though nothing's grown in them for 2 years. For most of those 6 years, it was just me and the quiet. The furnace ticking. The wind chimes on the porch. I'd gotten used to that kind of silence. Some men my age can't stand an empty house. I'd made peace with mine. Then, 16 months ago, my daughter, Rachel, called. She was 34, married to a man named Craig who sold commercial insurance, and mother to my granddaughter, Melissa, who'd just turned 6. Rachel said Craig's commission had dried up for 2 quarters running. They'd fallen behind on the mortgage on their townhouse, and the bank was making unfriendly noises. She asked if they could stay with me while they got back on their feet. I said yes before she'd even finished the sentence. Not for Craig, if I'm honest with myself. Not even entirely for Rachel. For Melissa. That girl walked through my front door carrying a plastic horse in each hand and looked up at the ceiling like she was measuring it, and something in me that had been quiet for a long time sat up and paid attention. She had Carol's laugh, that quick surprised bark of a laugh that came out before she could stop it. I'd have rebuilt the whole house a second time just to hear it more often. On a Saturday morning in April, I was up before the sun the way I always am, coffee in hand, sitting on the back porch, watching the mist come up off the ridge. I heard the screen door and small bare feet slapping against the boards. Grandpa Walt. Melissa climbed up onto the porch swing next to me without asking, dragging a blanket she called her. Thinking blanket. I had a dream about Grandma Carol. My chest did something complicated, the way it always did when Carol's name came out of that small mouth. Did you now? She was in a kitchen making pie. She gave me a piece, even though it was hot. Melissa looked up at me very seriously. Was she nice, Grandpa? Like, really nice, not just nice because she's dead? I laughed despite myself. She was the kindest woman I ever knew. She would have given you 2 pieces and let you lick the spoon. Melissa considered this with the gravity of a judge. I'm going to tell Mommy Grandma's tomatoes are magic. She'd noticed the cages out back the week before and decided, on her own authority, that anything Grandma Carol touched had to be magic. You go right ahead, I told her. She leaned into my side, quiet for a minute, watching a woodpecker work over the dead oak at the edge of the yard. Then, out of nowhere, the way kids do, Grandpa, will you always live here? I put my hand on the top of her head. D. This is my home, sweetheart. I built it. I'm not going anywhere. She nodded, satisfied. The way children accept a thing once someone they trust says it plainly. She tucked herself closer and went back to watching the bird. I want to be honest here, because when I tell you what came after, I don't want you thinking I hadn't noticed the tension building under that roof for months already. 16 months of shared space wears grooves into a house. There'd been looks, silences that lasted a beat too long, small frictions I couldn't point to directly. But that morning, with Melissa's weight against my arm and the coffee going cold in my hand, it still felt like a good morning. I didn't know it would be one of the last easy ones for a long while. 4 days later, I was in the upstairs hallway looking for a phone charger I thought I'd left in Rachel's old room. and I heard Rachel's voice coming low and even from behind Melissa's half-open door. "Melissa, look at me. Are you listening?" "Yes, Mommy." "Good. Now, I need you to understand something. If something happens, if you get hurt, if something breaks, if there's a mess, you don't cry about it right away in front of people. You wait. 1. You smile first, then later, when it's just us, you tell me." A pause. "Why, Mommy?" "Because people who cry in front of everyone get called dramatic. But people who keep it together, people who smile, they get believed later. Nobody questions the girl who held it together. You understand?" "I think so. Can you show me your holding it together smile?" There was a small pause, and then the sound of a child performing a smile for an audience of one. Rachel's voice warmed. "Perfect, baby. That's exactly right." I stood in that hallway with my hand flat against the wall and something cold moving through my stomach. I kept waiting for context that would soften what I'd just heard into something ordinary. It didn't come. This wasn't a mother comforting a shy child. This was rehearsal. I didn't say anything that day. I went downstairs, poured a glass of water, and stood at the kitchen sink looking out at Carol's tomato cages standing empty in the yard, running the conversation back through my head the way I used to check a measurement twice before I cut the board. I found no mistake in what I'd heard. It was a lesson, and my granddaughter was being trained in it like a trade. That evening, after Melissa was asleep, I found Rachel folding laundry in the living room and asked if we could talk. I kept my voice level, the way I'd learned to keep it level on job sites when a young guy had made a mistake and needed correcting without being crushed. "I overheard you and Melissa upstairs today," I said. "The part about smiling instead of reacting right away. I think that's going to hurt her, Rachel. Kids who learn to hide what they feel." I didn't ask for a parenting seminar, Dad. I know you didn't. But she's my granddaughter, and I live in this house, and—" "You live in this house." Her voice climbed, thin and sharp. "That's exactly it, isn't it? You think because it's your house you get to have opinions about how I raise my own daughter. That's not what You've done this for 16 months. Every look, every little comment, like I don't know what I'm doing." My jaw tightened, but I kept my hands loose. Rachel, I'm not trying to attack you. You retired, you've got nothing else to do, so you sit around deciding you know better than everybody." Her voice had gone flat and mean in a way I hadn't heard from her since she was a teenager. "You're not as sharp as you used to be, Dad, and it might be time you accepted that instead of sticking your nose into things you don't understand anymore." The words landed the way they were meant to. Not because they were true, because of how easily she said them, right there in the living room where Carol used to read to her every night of her childhood. The front door opened. Craig stepped in, tie loosened, and stopped the second he felt the temperature of the room. His eyes went from Rachel to me and back. Rachel's whole posture changed in an instant. Her chin trembled. "Your father just told me I'm ruining Melissa." "That's not what happened," I said. Craig's face did the thing I'd come to recognize over the past months, jaw forward, eyes locked. A man who'd already decided before hearing both sides. How? What did you say to her?" I raised a concern about something I overheard with Melissa. "That's all. He's been criticizing everything since we got here," Rachel said, and her eyes went glassy right on cue. Craig looked at her, at the shimmer building in her eyes, and I watched him make his choice in real time. "Craig, look at Walter," he said, not Dad. "Walter," which told me everything. "Apologize to Rachel. Right now. I haven't done anything that needs an apology. Apologize." 1. His voice hardened. "Or find somewhere else to sleep tonight." The room went very still. I looked at this man standing in my living room, in the house I'd nailed together board by board, telling me where I could and couldn't sleep. "Did you just tell the man who owns this house to leave it?" I asked quietly. Craig didn't blink. "If that's what it takes." I didn't argue further. I set my hands at my sides, turned, and walked down the hall to my bedroom. I closed the door the way Carol always said you should close a door when you're truly angry. Soft, deliberate. So the click of the latch does all your shouting for you. I sat on the edge of my bed in the dark for a long time, feeling the whole weight of it settle. Then, I did what I've always done when something needs solving. I started thinking instead of feeling, because feeling wasn't going to fix a single thing. The weeks that followed were a masterclass in cold civility. Good mornings in the kitchen, good nights in the hall. Smiles for Melissa's sake, so she wouldn't feel the floor shifting under her. If you'd walked in as a stranger, you'd have thought it was a quiet, ordinary house. You'd have been wrong. It was a Saturday at the end of April when Craig left early for a golf outing with a client. The house loosened the moment his car cleared the driveway, the way a held breath finally lets go. I was in Carol's old armchair in the living room, coffee and the newspaper, and on the shelf across from me sat Carol's music box, a hand-carved walnut thing she'd bought at a craft fair in the mountains the year we married. The one that played Claire de Lune slow and slightly off-key because one of the pins was worn. It had sat on that shelf for over 30 years, through 2 roof replacements and 1 hurricane that took half the oak trees on the street. Melissa came barreling down the stairs in socks, arms out for balance, and clipped the corner of the bookshelf with her shoulder. The music box rocked, tipped, and hit the hardwood. It didn't shatter, it cracked open along the old seam, the little mechanism inside spilling out onto the floor. Melissa froze, eyes huge, chest heaving. "Grandpa, I didn't mean—" I was already crouching in front of her. "I know you didn't. Sweetheart, it's okay. Are you hurt?" Rachel's voice came from the kitchen doorway. She took in the scene, the pieces, Melissa's stricken face, me on the floor with an efficiency that chilled me. Then, something passed between mother and daughter, quick and deliberate. "Tell Grandpa it's his fault for leaving it where you'd run into it," Rachel said, calm as anything. I watched it happen on my granddaughter's face, the genuine fear flickering into something rehearsed. She looked at her mother, then at me. "Grandpa," she said, her voice gone small and strange. "It's your fault." I didn't argue. I didn't look at Rachel. I gathered the pieces of Carol's music box into my cupped hands, carried them to my room, and set them carefully in an old cigar box on my closet shelf. I couldn't have told you exactly why I kept them, except that something in me, the same something that had guided 38 years of careful work, knew I was going to need proof of things before this was over. After that Saturday, I started watching Craig the way you watch a beam you suspect is carrying more weight than it should, not with hope layered over it anymore. Just watching what was actually there. What I found wasn't easy to sit with. It was a Tuesday evening when Craig came home looking like he'd been carrying something heavy all day. He went straight for the refrigerator and stood there without taking anything out. "Rough one?" I asked. Ha. Regional pulled our numbers apart in the call today. Blamed the shortfall on how our team logged renewals. Was it your team's fault? No. The data was right. Somebody upstream fat-fingered a spreadsheet before it ever got to us. "Did you say that?" He looked at me like I'd asked why water was wet. Started. That's not how it works, Walter. Seems like exactly how it should work. Easy for you to say. You're not the one who has to sit across from a regional VP with something to lose. He sat down heavy at the table. I turned my coffee mug in my hands. There's a difference between picking your battles and never fighting one. I'm not in the mood for a lecture. It's not a lecture. It's an observation. He stood up just as Rachel came through, glanced at the counter, and frowned. "Craig, did someone move my spice rack?" He turned, looked at the counter, looked at me. "Walter, did you move Rachel's spice rack?" I felt the whiplash of it, a man too afraid to correct his own boss over a plain fact, turning on a dime to correct his father-in-law over 4 inches of counter space. I needed room by the stove. I weaponed. I moved it back. "It's not back," Rachel said, not looking at me. "It's fine, Craig," I said. "I'll be more careful." I rinsed my mug, set it exactly where it belonged, and walked to my room without another word. I sat by the window and pressed my palms against my eyes, not to cry, but because a man's body sometimes needs somewhere to put what his mind is still working through. By the middle of May, Rachel had stopped arguing with me altogether. I made the mistake of thinking that was progress. What she'd switched to instead was quieter and far more effective, a slow, surgical rearrangement of the household that left me increasingly peripheral in my own home. No confrontations, just absence, engineered. It started with breakfast. For 16 months, Melissa had found whoever was in the kitchen in the mornings and attached herself to them the way 6-year-olds do. Most mornings, that was me. She'd climb up across from me and tell me about dinosaurs or ask why the sky did what it did. The first time Rachel redirected her, "Come eat with Mommy, baby, I made your eggs special," I thought nothing of it. The third time, I understood. One evening Melissa paused in the living room doorway, on her way to find me, her face lit with whatever she'd been planning to show me. "Melissa, Grandpa's resting. Don't bother him," Rachel called from the kitchen. "But I wanted to show him my drawing," Melissa said. Tomorrow, baby. Come on. I stood just around the corner, holding a book I'd been carrying to my room, and listened to her small feet go the other direction. Something in my chest pulled tight, the way a rope does around something it was never meant to bind. I began keeping a notebook, not out of spite, out of the same instinct that had guided 38 years of building things meant to last. Small failures start with small, undocumented things. A pattern isn't nothing. A pattern is a blueprint. Relief came, as it sometimes does, from an unexpected direction. On a Thursday afternoon in late May, I got a call from Melissa's elementary school. "Mr. Meiers, this is Miss Alvarez, Melissa's teacher. I wasn't able to reach Rachel or Craig this morning, and you're listed as a secondary contact. Do you have a few minutes? Is she hurt?" "No. She's fine physically. This is more of a, I wanted to flag a pattern I've noticed." She explained it carefully. Twice in the past 2 weeks, something had gone wrong in the classroom, a spilled paint tray, a torn art project, and both times, Melissa had smiled and said nothing was wrong, only for another student to report the truth later. "It's not that she's lying exactly, miss," Alvarez said. "It's that she seems to have learned not to react at all when something happens to her. That's unusual for a child her age, and I wanted to mention it before it becomes more entrenched." Then she added more carefully, "Last week during reading circle, she mentioned that at home, when something goes wrong, she's supposed to keep smiling until later. I asked her why. She said, because Mommy says people believe the girl who held it together." The kitchen went very quiet around me. "I appreciate you telling me this," I said. My hand had curled into a fist on the table without my noticing. "She's a wonderful, bright girl, Mr. Meiers. I just want to make sure she stays that way." When Rachel got home 40 minutes later, I told her the school had called. I held out the piece of paper with the teacher's number. Rachel took it without a word, folded it once, and put it in her pocket. Nobody mentioned it again. That silence told me more than any argument could have. 2 weeks after that, on a Sunday evening, I came home from a chess afternoon at my neighbor Hank's to find Craig standing rigid in the living room, arms crossed, and on the coffee table, in pieces, lay Carol's wall clock, a round-faced antique she'd bought at an estate sale the year we moved in. The one whose pendulum made a sound she used to call the house breathing. "Dad," Craig said dad again, when it suited him, "did you take this down this morning?" I looked at the pieces. The crack ran straight through the glass in a way no fall produces. I'd built things with my hands for 38 years. I know what falling looks like, and this wasn't it. "I haven't touched that clock in weeks," I said. "I was at Hank's all afternoon. Ask him." Rachel appeared in the kitchen doorway, drying her hands with slow, deliberate movements. "It was fine this morning, Walter. I walked past it at 8. I wasn't in this house," I said, keeping my voice level, though my hands had curled at my sides. Craig and Rachel exchanged a look, quick, private, already decided. "If you knocked it down by accident," Craig started. "I did not touch your mother-in-law's clock." He pressed his lips together, glanced at Rachel, and chose the easier road. "Okay, we'll get it fixed. Just be more careful with Carol's things." I stood there a long moment. Then I remembered, 3 months earlier, after a package had gone missing off the porch, Craig had installed a small security camera in the living room corner, angled toward the front door. We'd all forgotten it was there. I didn't rush to it that night. An engineer or a carpenter, in my case, doesn't pull a load-bearing wall before he knows what he's putting in its place. But I knew, from that moment, exactly what I was going to do. The only question left was when, and in what order. Carol's peonies came up again in June, the way they did every year, no matter how hard the winter had been. Standing in the yard with the hose one morning, my phone rang. It was Dennis Whitfield, a man I'd worked construction with for over a decade before he retired to Hendersonville. "Walt, you got a minute?" "Walt, I've got all morning." "You seen what Rachel's been putting on Facebook?" "You know I don't touch that thing, Dennis. That's why I'm calling." He read it to me, slow and reluctant. Something about living with someone who thinks ownership means control, about praying for peace in her own home, about some men can't accept their time has passed. 40-some likes. A dozen comments, 2 from people we both knew from the old crew, worried, sympathetic, having no idea who they were actually worried about. "Thank you for telling me, Dennis. I mean that." "You want me to say something?" "No. Don't touch it. If you respond, it becomes an argument, and that's exactly what she wants. Best thing anybody can do is nothing." I hung up and stood in the peonies a long while, understanding now that Rachel had taken this outside the house, into a place where I had no voice at all. That night I called an old friend from my church congregation, a man named Arthur Boone who'd gone into elder law after 30 years in general practice. I told him I needed to talk through a property situation. "Come, by Thursday," he said. 2 o'clock. Arthur's office was small, book-lined, unhurried. I told him everything: the hallway conversation, the ultimatum, the isolation, the school call, the clock, the camera. He listened without interrupting, the way a man listens when he already suspects the shape of what's coming. "Walk me through the ownership," he said when I finished. "Mine outright." Carol's name came off the deed automatically when she passed. No mortgage. Rachel and Craig moved in 16 months ago. No lease, no rent, nothing in writing. I told them to stay as long as they needed. Then legally, in North Carolina, they're occupants by permission licensees, not tenants, Arthur said. That distinction matters enormously. Tenants have real protections under state law and require formal eviction proceedings. A licensee occupies with your consent, and that consent can be revoked with proper written notice. Given they've been there over a year, you'd want to give them a reasonable notice period. 30 days is standard practice here, though I'd recommend 60 to leave no room for a legal challenge. Clear, dated, delivered, so you can prove it. And the camera footage? North Carolina is a one-party consent state. 1. A camera, in a common area of a home you own, recording without anyone's knowledge, is legal. If what you're describing is what that footage shows, it would matter a great deal not just for the notice, but if this ever touches a custody or visitation question involving Melissa. "I don't want to take Melissa from her father," I said. "I want her safe, and I want to still be in her life." Understood. North Carolina courts do recognize grandparent visitation rights, where a substantial relationship exists and is being actively interfered with. What you've described, the documented isolation, the school's concerns, the footage gives you real standing if it ever comes to that. I hope it doesn't. So do I. He made a note, then looked up. "You mentioned wanting to protect something for Melissa specifically." I told him about the trust I'd been turning over for 2 weeks irrevocable, Melissa as sole beneficiary, an independent trustee, covering school, medical needs, and a provision for when she came of age. "You understand what irrevocable means," Arthur said. "Once it's funded, it's not yours anymore. Not if your relationship with Rachel changes, not for anything. I understand it completely." He studied me a moment, the way he used to study a contract for the clause someone was hoping he'd miss. "You've thought this through. I built houses for 38 years. I don't start until I know exactly what I'm building toward. We spent the better part of 2 hours on it. On my way out, he shook my hand and held it a beat longer than business required. "Whatever this has cost you, Walter, you're doing this the right way." I drove home with the windows down for the first time in months, feeling like I could finally see the road ahead of me. 3 weeks later, on a Thursday evening, I sat at my desk with the finished trust papers in front of me, reviewed by Arthur, funded through my accounts, needing only a signature. I thought about Craig, a decent man once, underneath whatever he'd let himself become. I thought about Melissa's small hand on mine at the kitchen table, about her holding it together smile, about the question she'd asked on the porch swing in April. "Will, you always live here?" I signed my name the way I sign everything, slow, legible, like it mattered, because it did. I looked at Carol's photograph on the corner of the desk, the two of us on the porch the summer we finished framing the house, both of us covered in sawdust and grinning like fools. "I'm doing what I can," I told her quietly. "The rest is up to them." The following Friday morning, I made 2 phone calls. The first was to Arthur. The second, later that evening after dinner, was to nobody but myself, sitting in the dark of my own room, deciding it was time. At 7 the next morning, I called Arthur back. "Today," I said. "I'll be there by 10. Locksmith's already arranged." At 8:30, when the house started stirring, I did something I hadn't done in nearly 4 months. I sat down at the kitchen table for breakfast. Rachel stopped cold in the doorway when she saw me, recalculated, and turned back to the coffee maker without a word. Melissa came down in her pajamas, rubbing her eyes, and her whole face opened up. "Grandpa's eating with us? Just this morning, sweetheart." She climbed into the chair beside me, warm and trusting, and something in my chest pulled so tight I had to breathe through it slow. At 10 o'clock, the doorbell rang. Craig answered it and found Arthur Boone on the porch in a gray suit, briefcase in hand. "Good morning, Craig. Is Walter available?" Craig's face went through confusion, recognition, and something close to dread in about 3 seconds. He stepped back without a word. We sat in the living room, under the empty hook where Carol's clock used to hang. Arthur opened his briefcase. Rachel appeared in the doorway, dish towel in hand, and the color drained from her face. "What is this?" Arthur read the notice clearly, without hurry. At Walter Meiers, sole owner of the property, revoking the residential license extended to Rachel and Craig Whitfield, 60 days written notice as provided under North Carolina law, effective vacancy date in early August. "This is insane," Rachel said, her voice shaking. You can't do this. We live here. As licensees rather than tenants," Arthur said evenly. "You don't carry the same protections. Mr. Meiers has followed the proper legal procedure. 60 days is more than generous." I'm in. "Craig, say something," Rachel snapped. Craig looked at me, really looked at me, for the first time since April, without Rachel's version of events standing between us. "Dad, what is this?" "This is my home, Craig," I said quietly. You told the man who built it, board by board, to find somewhere else to sleep. I chose not to. I got up, walked to the back door, and found Melissa hovering in the hallway, unsettled by the noise. "Hey, sweetheart, come help me check on Grandma Carol's peonies." We stood among the flowers while the locksmith worked inside, and she asked me why peonies got so heavy. They sometimes needed sticks to hold them up, and I told her it was because the most beautiful things often need a little extra support, and there was nothing wrong with that. They were gone by the end of July. I watched Craig's car pull out of the driveway for the last time, back seat packed with boxes, and felt something I hadn't expected. Not satisfaction, but a clean, uncomplicated grief for the family this should have been and wasn't. 6 weeks later, on a Tuesday night, Craig called. His voice was flatter than I'd ever heard it. "She told me last week. She only married me because I seemed stable," he said. "Said she'd been disappointed pretty much since year 3. A long breath. "Dad, was she always like that? Or did I do something?" "I think you both made choices that led here," I said. "That's not the same as it being your fault. It just means you get to choose differently from here on." He was quiet a long moment. "I'm sorry, Dad, for all of it." The words landed somewhere in me that had been waiting 7 months to hear them. "I know," I said. "The door's open whenever you're ready." He came by in September, and we sat at the kitchen table with coffee, and it wasn't the same as it used to be, but it was something worth building on. In November, on a gray Saturday, I was in the backyard wrapping burlap around Carol's peony beds for the winter when I heard sneakers on the garden path. Melissa came running, coat unzipped, face red and wet with something that wasn't rain. She crashed into me and wrapped both arms around my waist, and this time the crying was real, the kind that shakes a person from the inside, the kind a child cries when something's been held in far too long. I went down on both knees in the wet grass and held on. "I've got you," I said. "I've got you." Mommy said I have to be mad at you," she said, the words breaking apart between sobs. "But I'm not, Grandpa. I'm not mad. I don't want to hold it in anymore." My eyes burned so fiercely I had to close them. "You never have to hold anything in with me. Not ever." She looked up, searching my face the way children do when they need the truth, and have learned they don't always get it. Whatever she found there settled something in her, and she leaned back into me and let out a breath that seemed to empty her whole small body of something she'd been carrying too long. Looking back on those months now, I think about the ultimatum, the isolation, the broken clock, the footage, the 60 days, and I keep arriving at the same place. I wasn't a perfect father to Rachel. There were things I should have said years before the roof nearly caved in. If I could go back, I'd say the hard things sooner, with more love, and less patience for the silence that lets damage grow roots. What I know now, at 71, is that dignity isn't something anyone else can hand you or take from you. It's something you decide to hold on to, not out of pride, but for the sake of the child watching to see whether you will. That's the whole lesson. That's all of it. I believe in the quiet kind of justice, the kind that doesn't shout, that shows up on a Saturday morning with a briefcase and 60 days of written notice, that protects a 6-year-old girl's right to cry when something hurts, instead of learning to hide it. If any part of this reminded you of your own house, your own family, Tell me where you're watching from tonight. I read every single one of them. And if you believe some things are worth protecting quietly and completely, stay with me. There are more stories like this one still to tell.